Welcome back, everyone, to The Tsunami is Coming, What Keeps Me Up at Night edition. Today is a special edition of this podcast because I get to speak to a very good friend, in addition to being a terrific colleague, Olivier Chatain, a professor of strategy at HEC Paris. Olivier, thank you so much for being my guest in this podcast.
Thank you, Jeremy. I am thrilled by this new experience.
I hope you will remain thrilled till the end. Dear Olivier, to you, like to every other guest I have had, let me ask you this. What keeps you up at night?
Yeah, well, I think what keeps me up at night is that the a lot of the assumptions we have been we have made all our lives, at least all my life, about the world around us, about certain stable things, and things that we all took for granted are no longer valid. And an example recently is the closure of the Hormuz Gulf, Detroit, sorry, Hormuz Detroit, which is something that was not really thinkable for most of us. I have vague memories when I was maybe, I don't know, 10 years old during the tail end of the Iran-Iraq war, but that did not really happen again. We had something a bit similar happening a couple of years ago in the Red Sea with the Houthi. But now what we have is like unprecedented because we have the closure of this Detroit, which is because of the threats and because of the will of one of the neighboring country, Iran, which probably 6 months ago thought it would be way too risky to even attempt cutting that Detroit.
Yeah,
And
it was kind of considered like the nuclear option, no pun intended, on the part of many actors. And there we have it. We're going through it
yeah,
right now.
and it was a nuclear option in the sense that first it's a big deal, and then the consequences would be maybe very very bad. I mean, it may absolutely backfire. And this was frowned upon the Iranian regime by circumstances, and they find out that A, they're still alive after that intervention, and B, they have nothing to lose, and C, turns out they can actually blackmail the entire world, and no one is willing or able to pay the price to end that. And where I think it is really something that's very very different and that's really a change is that that's effectively the end of the regime of quasi absolute freedom of navigation that we have all taken for granted and thought it was something that was as natural as air and water, like a basic element for the past 80 years. And that's really incredible that you had this series of decisions that turns out that the yeah freedom of navigation is not cannot be taken for granted, and even the power, the US, which has based its I would say its power and had all the incentives to keep freedom of navigation because that's what they were the common good they were giving to everyone, and in return there was this world of globalization that's possibly over. Not It's not gonna be, it's not gonna fully crumble, but the unthinkable has happened. It turns
Oh,
out that yeah.
yeah, we can, I mean, imagine very straightforward implications, scary, but straightforward implications for supply chains, for globalization itself. But I know your research has also uncovered direct ties as well with cables. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so we're talking about submarine communication cables, like fiber optics that runs around the world, and that where most of the traffic between continents is going. So satellites are not yet able to catch all that bandwidth, and that internet traffic goes through cables, and cables, turns out, are regulated the same way as shipping. So the freedom of navigation is applying exactly similarly to submarine cables as to subsea cables as to shipping, which means that these cables are going through all the straits that we know are important and sensitive. So you have the Bab el Mandeb at the southern end of the Red Sea. You have the Hormuz Strait if you want to go to the Persian Gulf, the Malacca Strait, and a whole series of straits which we know very much are very important for shipping, but they're just as important for submarine cables because they more or less follow the same routes. And if you look at, so I was asked recently by a journalist about the consequences of Iran toying with the idea, apparently, of taxing submarine subsea communication cables going through the Hormuz Strait. And my answer was like, well, there are two interesting things going on. Number one, it's exactly the parallel as the shipping being stopped, but there's a difference because shipping is like a tap. You can turn it on and off. But if you want to stop a submarine cable, you have to cut it. And when it's cut because it's really physical infrastructure. You cannot redeploy it, which means that in terms of, I would say, of leverage, if you threaten to cut it, once you cut it, you have nothing, you have no leverage left because it's gone. While with the shipping through the strait, you can always be like, oh no, wait a minute, maybe we're going to authorize the shipping to go.
So,
To go
Olivier,
through.
are you telling me that would be the true nuclear option that no one is really imagining right now?
Well, I think there's a sense that it's not really credible, or it's a one-off. You have a one-shot gun, and then okay, now what you have done is that you just removed your future ability to use that leverage. But what was more interesting, I think, was that there's actually interesting developments around Egypt and Israel that we see with respect to communication cables. So Egypt Telecom has been making quite a nice business, being the bottleneck if you want to have a fiber optic cable going from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, you have to go through Egypt traditionally because you have the Suez Canal there, or you have to take a land route, and that goes through Egypt Telecom, which is making a good business because it has a high price. It's really a choke point. But as a result of that, so think of it as a tax, okay? You see where I'm going now. As a result of that, you have alternative projects that are planning to go through Israel and the Aqaba Gulf to go around that bottleneck where the tax is too high. And what we're seeing is something that we're going to see a lot more is this situation where there is a risk that did not used to exist around the choke point. The choke point is under threat in ways that were really only theoretical. I mean, you had all these textbooks about geopolitics with all the straits very important. And then what was the last time was a problem? Maybe a couple of pirates or something like this. But no, it's real. It's happening. But the bottom line is that now you have, maybe we need landlines, terrestrial lines, going from, say, Qatar through Iraq, through Syria, to the Mediterranean Sea. And at this point, these threats and these choke points are going to create incentives to go around the bottlenecks in a way that was never done before because it was not painful enough to do that.
If we're thinking about, it's certainly clear, I think, to many of the listeners of the how big of a game changer this is. But if we're trying to translate this into the so what for businesses here, who is this going to matter for? And what type of questions should those industries be asking immediately, in your opinion?
So any multinational has data going from one corner of the world to the opposite of it. And first, they have to know what route are those data taking, what kind of contract do they have with bandwidth providers, what guarantees do they have, are they going to be affected if the latency is going to be dropping because something is going to be cut? Maybe yes, maybe not. My research suggests that the two there are two firms in the world whose lifeblood depends on securing a more or less constant latency of data. That's those who strive, who make money out of attention. That's Google and Meta. These guys are those who are investing, have been investing for the past 15 years in submarine cables. You can think that some financial companies are in the same boat. So you actually have specialized, let's say, entrepreneurs or investment companies that set up transatlantic cables, partly targeted to financial markets, so that you could do arbitrage between London and New York. So any but every company to some extent depends on that. So you have to understand your exposure. And then I think that's the easy part, because I think the harder part may come later, which is more a governance issue, is that you have to convince your board that you have to invest in something that you hope you will never use. So these are only extra costs for which is very hard to show an immediate extra, let's say, it's not a differentiator, because that's kind of an insurance company that insurance policy that you may have to purchase. It's not very sexy. It's not going to be a short-term competitive advantage, but yet you have to convince your board that, well, we must do that because there are, all these black swans are becoming gray swans, and they're becoming more and more lighter in color, and they may be appearing faster than we think. And this is where I think the whole Hormuz strait business should really make people think, because now we are very concentrated on managing the crisis, but there's no, I don't quite see a scenario where we are going to come back to the statu quo ante. And this is the key.
This is very clear, and we've spoken about this together quite a few times, Olivier. What I find striking is that geopolitical risk is a very easy place to be complacent when you're a firm, thinking this is a far away type of question. It's not one that is operational, not one that is immediate. Often firms will brush it off as philosophical or broader, longer run. Here, you're basically making the case that it's about to be a huge game changer in many, many operations, not even strategy to some extent.
Yeah, and again, to me, these issues of communication and cables, because it's physical infrastructure, it's very clear who has sovereignty over which piece of the cable. But that also means that you need to know who has sovereignty on the maybe listening or tapping the data that you're transmitting. And there's another set of risk. It's not really new, but I think that what's happening is that this is something that, transmitting confidential data about people between the US and the EU used to be, to exaggerate a little bit, a bank or an airline problem. But now it's everyone's problem, possibly. And we don't even know we have this problem, which is already an issue. And number two, how do we pay to shield ourselves from that problem?
Mm.
Because the payoff is a lot of people, I think, are intellectually they understand, but they don't have it as, no, you don't understand. That can happen in 6 months somewhere, we have no idea. And maybe it will never happen. And then you'll be like the person who blew 10 million euros into having a special contract to have to go through a weird cable that avoids everything, and you will be blamed because your P&L doesn't look good.
Yeah. Very clear, Olivier. Thank you so much. I think we found the motto of geopolitical risk and cable risk. It's everyone's problem. I don't know if that's the sexiest way, but it's certainly,
Yeah.
raising awareness. So I hope you're still thrilled by now and that you'll come again on my podcast, dear
Well,
Olivier.
I don't know. I'll check again.
All right.
We'll talk after the podcast. No, joke aside, thanks very much, Jeremy. That's really interesting to talk about that with you, and yeah, that definitely keeps me up at night.
All right. Well, comments, thoughts, what you're seeing on your end of the world, please do share with Olivier and myself. This is probably going to be a conversation that will be ongoing for quite a bit of time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we will speak next week. Take care, everyone.